rien n'est plus républicain.
Hello and welcome to Unscripted. I'm Kavita Hawaii. Today's featured guest is Andrew Peter Napolitano, otherwise known as Judge Napolitano. He's an American retired jurist and syndicated columnist, a news analyst, a legal scholar, and best-selling author as well, whose work appears in numerous publications like The Washington Post. Now, his X account reads, Judging Freedom, hard-hitting legal political news, defending individual freedoms, respecting the Constitution. Well, that's what we're going to take a look at with him. He joins us now. Judge Napolitano, welcome to Unscripted.
Oh, Kabe, my friend, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
The pleasure is all ours here at the program, and I'm going to ask you about this flag or banner on your X account, hard-hitting legal political news, from a man who knows and respects the Constitution and the importance of defending individual freedoms. I'm wondering why you brought that in. Either that obviously ranks very high with you, or you felt maybe a need to highlight it since maybe parts of it, again, this is my just observation, perhaps, that some parts of it are failing, perhaps, American people.
The Constitution is failing the American people terribly. It is not followed by any of the three branches of the government. Under the Constitution, only the Congress can impose taxes. We've allowed the president to impose a tax. Under the Constitution, no one can be confined by the government without being brought before a judge for a hearing. The president has denied them hearings. Under the Constitution, only Congress can declare war. Oh my goodness. The Congress hasn't declared war in the U.S. since December 8th, 1941. We fought dozens of wars since then. So the Constitution is regularly disregarded by all three branches of government. Presidents take power from the Congress. Congress looks the other way. The courts let them do it. The court system, of which I was once a part, Kabe, as you know, was intended to be the restraint on extra constitutional behavior, but it often defers to the other two branches, the president and the Congress, and lets them get away with it. My recent column, which comes out tomorrow about the government stealing property, concludes with the lamentable statement that the Constitution, as an instrument of restraint, has been a dismal failure. We pay lip service to it, but the government really rarely complies with it.
Well, when you talk about the Constitution that way, it sounds like it's taking a beating from right, center, and left. I don't mean in terms of the political parties, just in general, right? So doesn't that impact Americans? Well,
yes.
I mean, it impacts Americans to the point where they become disenchanted, don't they?
Yes. The argument that I have made, and many of the guests on my show have, is that we don't really have two political parties in the Congress. We have one big government party, which is controlled by the military-industrial complex, controlled by an insidious organization called AIPAC, with which you are probably familiar, which is a foreign lobbying group that lobbies in behalf of the government of Israel, but doesn't have to comply with any of the requirements that other foreign lobbying groups do. And the military-industrial complex assures extraordinary Defense Department budgets. The new budget will be more than $1 trillion a year. That's more than the next 10 countries, including Russia, which has a better army, and China, which has a better navy. That's more than the next 10 countries combined, but the members of Congress are corrupted by the military-industrial complex. They're also corrupted by the donations to their campaigns by the Zionist organizations, which caused them to embrace a genocidal maniac like Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as if he were Franklin Roosevelt or Abraham Lincoln. So the Congress is totally corrupted by the influence of money in politics.
Very well. Let's take a look at one of the examples, perhaps, that I can name of how the Constitution, maybe in one form or another, is, I don't want to say violated, but not taken to its word. And there was a clip from X that you put on your account where Senator Maggie Hassan asked what is habeas corpus, and Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, said it's the constitutional right that the president has to remove people from this country, of which she responded that that is not the definition of habeas corpus. Is that the type of violation of Constitution perhaps we're talking about, lawmakers and their interpretation?
Yes, Kabe, but it's worse than that because it's gross ignorance on the part of the chief officer of the federal government in charge of the deportations. She doesn't even understand that everybody must be given a hearing before being deported. That's guaranteed by the Constitution. She totally misunderstood what habeas corpus is. Granted, it's a Latin phrase, but it's been around since 1215 in Magna Carta, and then was used again in the Constitution when it was written in 1789. It is the right of every person, not American citizen, but every person, whether citizen or not, who's confined by the government, whether it's for spitting on the sidewalk or murder or illegal entry into the United States, whatever it is, every person confined by the government has the right to be brought before a judge and have the government lay out the evidence against the person and justify their confinement. If this right weren't there, then the government could arrest without trial anybody that it wanted. Now, the fact that she doesn't understand this is extremely lamentable. This Department of Homeland Security, which is not authorized by the Constitution, which was hastily cobbled together in the administration of George Bush and Dick Cheney right after the tragedy of 9/11, has 165,000 police officials that she controls. They don't look like cops. They wear khaki pants and black shirts, and when they arrest you, they wear masks. This is decidedly un-American, but this is the small army that Kristi Noem commands. For her not to understand what the basic laws are is reprehensible. Make it even worse, she has about 500 lawyers who work for her, any one of whom could tell her what this means.
Well, that sounds like she's put the tools in place, but I'm curious about the ones that you described in terms of the attire that they wear. Why do they wear that? I know that some of them have been out, for example, arresting some of the voices of pro-Palestinians, voices from students at different universities, and they've targeted them. Does that fit into this? I mean, is that part of the way that this administration wants to deport people from the U.S. in addition to the immigrants?
The short answer to your question is yes. The longer answer to your question is this non-police attire goes back to 2001. I don't know why they don't dress like police officers. Look, the FBI, which is also not authorized by the Constitution, they wear business suits they dress like you and I are now, so they don't dress like police either. But they also don't go about putting masks on and arresting college students because of what they say. The Department of Homeland Security has been doing that. None of this is constitutional, and the fact that they wear khaki pants and black shirts and masks is just pours salt on the wound. It just makes it even worse. But nobody can answer the question about why they're attired this way. The president can't answer it, and the Secretary of Homeland Security can't answer it. It's sometimes a little creepy when you're walking down the street and you see a couple of dozen of them walking towards you. You say, well, what are they doing here? NYPD, New York Police Department, protects me. I know them when I see them. I know the cops in my neighborhood. I don't know these guys. What are they doing here? So you just sort of hold your breath and pass them.
Looking at one of the points you made about the U.S. defense budget, we call it the military budget. I mean, $1 trillion is a lot. Doesn't sound like that has obviously been reduced in any sense of the word, but rather slowly and surely increased to the level and to the numbers that we're looking at now. This attitude of the U.S. or approach by the U.S. to want to spend that much money translates into many different forms. One of them that I want to ask you about is how they feel like they have to police the world. I know this has been asked before, but tell us the different ways how that translates into the 700 or 750, 60 military, posts or centers that they have around the world, and how that actually affects the foreign policy of the respective countries and what kind of control that exerts on the governments there.
Well, you put your finger on it. I mean, to fund At one point, it was 903. Nobody really knows what the number is. That's the highest number I saw. But it's at least 8 or 900 military facilities around the world that the Defense Department pays for. To make this even worse, the Defense Department has failed the last 8 audits that it is conducted. It is required to have itself audited by outside auditors. The past 8 years in a row, it has failed, meaning hundreds of billions with a B dollars unaccounted for. Donald Trump has repeatedly said he doesn't want us to be the world's policeman. We're not going to tell others how to live. That the George W. Bush, and this goes back to Woodrow Wilson, but the George W. Bush attitude of we're going to force Western democracy on people as to whom that type of government is alien is no longer the policy of the federal government. However, he says one thing and does another. He still wants to fund all these military operations. We're still in countries that have asked us to leave, and we refuse to leave. Surrounding you now are about 100,000 American troops in about 25 or 30 different facilities. Most Americans don't even know that. What are they doing there? Iran doesn't pose a threat to the national security of the United States. Why do we have all these troops aimed at Iran? I don't think Donald Trump could answer that question if it were put to him.
Well, let's take a look at one of the branches of this whole defense operation. In some sense of the word, I'm describing the Israeli regime and the Prime Minister Netanyahu. He obviously is conducting this genocidal war in the Gaza Strip. That's how we describe this war. What do you think about what and how he is conducting this genocidal war? Because you've covered that in your program. I mean, really, it's
right.
Beyond words what's happening there. And let me ask you this, because I'd like to ask you what you asked in one of your programs. You said, do you think the Americans understand what is going on in the Gaza Strip? I mean, how attached or detached are Americans now, or are they more informed than before?
I think Americans are slowly beginning to understand what goes on in the Gaza Strip. It is the most horrific slaughter of innocent human beings, genocidal slaughter since World War II. It has transformed the Israeli government into the Nazi-like behavior which they profess to condemn. And nobody seems to be willing to lift a finger to stop it. This week, some of the leaders of European countries, Prime Minister Starmer of Great Britain, President Macron of France, have suggested that they will enter into an embargo and stop trading with Israel. My God, it's too little and too late. We don't even know how many people have been slaughtered. The Lancet, the British medical journal, says it's over 200,000. The Palestinian authorities themselves say that they've conducted funerals for over 55,000. A former member of the Knesset joins with 2 members of the government, whose last names are Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, and openly call for the murder of Palestinian babies by starvation. It's absolutely mind-boggling, the horrific crimes that are being perpetrated by Prime Minister Netanyahu's government, and it's being funded by the United States taxpayer. Joe Biden was derisively called Genocide Joe, and it really rattled him, didn't change his policies. Donald Trump should have a similar moniker, a similar nickname, because the genocide is just as bad, if not worse now, than it was 6 months ago, and Trump continues to fund it. When the United States Congress authorizes military supplies, whether to Israel or to Ukraine, I think you probably know this, but so your viewers know it, it is subject to the discretion of the president. So even though all these billions have been authorized, he doesn't have to spend it. Stated differently, Donald Trump could stop the slaughter in Gaza in 24 hours with a phone call. He could also stop the war in Ukraine in about 2 weeks. with a phone call. He has not made either of those calls. Rather, the American taxpayer continues to fund in Ukraine a dastardly losing war, in Gaza the most horrific genocide of the modern era.
Okay, why do you think he hasn't made that call to Netanyahu to end the war, which we understand he actually has made some motions towards that? We're going to get about the situation in Ukraine in a second. But as you said, with a phone call, he could end this Gaza genocide. Why do you think he's not doing that?
I think he is culturally and financially, not ideologically, he doesn't have an ideology. He is culturally and financially wedded to the donor class. This is AIPAC, American Israeli Political Action Committee. These are wealthy American Jews and non-Jews who are Zionists, who contributed huge amounts of money. One famous one by Mrs. Adelson was a check for $100 million to Trump's campaign, and who contribute financially to the campaigns of about 3/4 to 4/5 of all sitting members of Congress. That train of cash is one that he does not want to disrupt. Now, having said that, there have been a lot of stories in the press lately about how he's sick and tired of Prime Minister Netanyahu. He believes that Netanyahu is humiliating him and playing him like a fiddle, which is an American insult.
Right.
But he doesn't seem to change his policies. He may dislike Netanyahu personally. I don't know if the man is likable or not. He's a horrible human being. But he doesn't seem to change the policies because of his deference to this donor class that has strategically distributed money. They don't march in the streets, Kabe. They don't take full-page ads in newspapers. They have person-to-person financial relationships with all the important people in the government. I'm not saying they're bribing these people. I'm saying they have contributed so heavily to these people's campaigns that the members of Congress want the gravy train to come in. They also fear antagonizing this group. Recently, this group sponsored Democratic candidates in primary elections and spent about $25 million on 2 elections. That's unheard of in a primary where you normally spend a fraction of that. But they were willing to spend that kind of money to rid the House of Representatives of 2 Democrats who had the temerity to stand on the floor of the House and criticize Israel.
You're talking about the 2 as being part of the squad, perhaps, and the $100 million that AIPAC has set aside?
One was named Jamal Bowman, and the other was named Cori Bush. In Bowman's case, he represented the poorest district in the United States of America in the South Bronx, and they managed to spend $13 million to defeat him. That's an extraordinary amount of money in a very small and poor area. In the case of Cori Bush, I believe Cori was from Missouri, and they spent about $10 or $12 million to defeat her. You know, it's really absurd. Not only does the Israeli regime want to prevent the press from seeing what's going on in Gaza. We only know what's going on because the Palestinian people use their mobile devices when there's an internet. They not only want to suppress the press from reporting what's going on, they want to suppress Americans from expressing their free speech. They want to stop members of Congress from criticizing the Israeli regime. And in the case of former Congressman Bowman and former Congresswoman Bush, they succeeded.
Well, Judge Napolitano, one of the things that really is shocking, aside from the gruesome pictures, videos coming out of the Gaza Strip, which is pretty much broadcast in real time, I'm sure you've heard that before, is how you have the Israeli regime officials coming out with some statements that just really truly becomes shocking. This one coming from Moshe Feiglin, a former MK Israeli parliamentarian. He said, not a single Gaza child should remain in the Gaza Strip. Every child in Gaza is our enemy. Child that you are giving milk to in the Gaza Strip will in 15 years rape your daughters and conquer our children. Does that speak of a truth, or does that speak of how they want to forcibly take over the Gaza Strip and displace the Palestinians?
It speaks to the Netanyahu regime. It speaks to an apartheid government, and it speaks to the silence of the West. It's utterly reprehensible that anybody could say anything like that, and very few people would raise a voice against it. As I was mentioning earlier, when Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed the Congress, if you'll permit this little aside, Kabe, his speech was 56 minutes long. He was interrupted 58 times with standing ovations. The longest and loudest standing ovation was when he condemned pro-Palestine voices. He stood where Lincoln and Roosevelt and Reagan stood, in the very same spot, and condemned the First Amendment, condemned free speech, and the Congress gave him a standing ovation. That's what we have here. In Israel, we have mowing the lawn. They have all kinds of euphemisms, but they want to use starvation as a weapon of war. Tom Fletcher, who's the UN High Commissioner of Humanitarian Rights, you're probably familiar with him, reported 2 days ago that 14,000 Gazan babies have 48 hours to live, or they will die of malnutrition. Has anything been done to save them? I don't know the answer to that, but I think if something was done to save them, we would have heard about it.
I think you did, though, when we went 4 months into the attack after October 7th of the IOF forces inside the Gaza Strip. We heard about that pier, the floating pier, I think, that the U.S. Army built to the tune of $350 million. Remember that, to bring in aid?
Yeah.
Which didn't last that long. It was broken up by the wind or something. But what was that all about? I mean, it just seemed like it was a show.
That was a crazy idea that Joe Biden's people had.
Judge Napolitano, let's move on to another topic here, and that is one that has been flip-flopping, and that has to deal with the war in Ukraine. We have seen how the U.S. President Donald Trump appeared to be on a momentum, I don't know if you agree or not, to reaching maybe some kind of solution, but it seems like that has gone somewhat cold, yet it's back now in terms of the engagement. You seem to think that the Russians' mentality, as you stated, is that it would not and has not historically stopped fighting for the purpose of negotiating. Is that your thought on this in terms of negotiations with Russia?
Well, it's my understanding, because the Russians have been steadfast going back to the days of Napoleon, that they will not engage in a ceasefire, which just allows the enemy to regroup and then conduct negotiation. Look, the Ukraine war is an absolute tragedy. Trump is correct that he didn't start it, but he's wrong when he says it's not my war, it's his war now. The whole reason we have the war is because President Biden and then British Prime Minister Boris Johnson dissuaded then President, he's no longer the president, then President Zelensky to reject a treaty. It's 126 pages long. I'm showing my fingers as to how its length, every page of which was initialed, had been negotiated by the Russians and the Ukrainians in Istanbul in February, March, and April of 2022. Boris Johnson said, "Don't worry about it. We got your back. Don't give in to these people." They tore the treaty up, and the Russians began their military operation, and the United States funded the war. The theory of the war was that the Americans could use the Ukrainians as a battering ram with which to drive Vladimir Putin from office. Why do they want to drive Vladimir Putin from office? Because the American public policy thinks it knows what is better for each country than the voters and the leadership of those countries know. And the neocons in the State Department, going back to the Obama years in 2014, when the CIA conducted its coup over the popularly elected Ukrainian president, they all think that they know what's better for Ukraine and for Russia than the Ukrainian and Russian people do. Donald Trump should stick to his initial instinct, which was, I'm not going to fund the war. But under that statute, which makes the delivery of military arms subject to the president's discretion, he has continued arms, ammunition, and intel to support the losing Ukrainian cause. He lamented the other day that the Ukrainians are losing between 5,000 and 6,000 young men a week. That is probably accurate. He should stop it. He should say to Zelensky, we're not giving you any more money. Crimea is Russian. The oblasts are Russian. NATO has no business in Ukraine. Become a prosperous neutral country like Austria or Switzerland. Get out of the Russians' faces. Now, I say to my conservative Republican friends, how do you think we would react if the Chinese entered into a treaty with the Mexicans and China put intercontinental ballistic missiles on the Mexican-Texas border and aimed them at Chicago or New York? Of course we would fight back. That's exactly what Putin is doing.
All right. The Iran indirect U.S. talks is the next area we need to get into. And it seems like, based on what the coverage is at least, that there is a challenge for the U.S. to accept Iran's continued enrichment. Based on what I'm looking at over here, that's how it's been presented in the news, in terms of how Witkoff has said that, we will not allow any type of enrichment for Iran's nuclear program, even though Iran is a member of the NPT. Give us your thoughts on what we are looking at right now. I mean, are we really supposed to believe that because of this, then you have the Israeli regime coming out and saying, yes, we're thinking of attacking Iran now since, these talks may be headed to a dead end? At least that's the type of impression that they're giving off right now.
I don't know Mr. Witkoff. He is the de facto Secretary of State. I can't imagine how Marco Rubio feels, because Witkoff is doing all these high-level negotiations himself. At one point, he was in favor of, and that means Donald Trump was in favor of, allowing Iran nuclear enrichment for non-military purposes. However, he told an American talk show just 3 days ago on Sunday, Kabe, that the United States government is now taking the position that Iran should not have any nuclear enrichment whatsoever. You want my opinion?
Yes.
My opinion is that Iran has every right to build whatever instrument of self-defense it wants to build. It has every right to have nuclear weapons. And if it did have nuclear weapons, it would be a counterweight to those monsters in Tel Aviv who keep threatening to use theirs. It would neutralize the Israelis, who don't even admit that they have one. You're not even allowed to say, if you work for the American government, that the Israelis have one. They have one because they stole the knowledge from American scientists. Nevertheless, it's another story for another time.
Indeed.
Iran should be able to have its own nuclear weapon, and that would keep the Netanyahu regime in its place.
One of the pieces of news was that Iran suggested West Asia, we call West Asia, Middle East is how others reported, free of nuclear weapons, free of WMDs of any sort, and they did point towards the Israeli regime. But my last question here is, when you take a look at the talks themselves, before they began, one would imagine that some of these issues that there's such divergence on were probably thrown about somehow behind the curtains. I'm just guessing right now, Judge Napolitano, before they would come and for there to then be wide differences. Isn't that, don't you think that should have happened beforehand, before the talks even began?
Yes, Kabe, I agree with you, but I think because the Biden administration took this bizarre view that it would not talk to Russia and it would not talk to Iran, that Mr. Witkoff has had to start from scratch, from square one. He has no staff because he operates on his own. At least Marco Rubio has the entire State Department of researchers and diplomats and historians to advise him. I think Mr. Witkoff lacks a full grasp of the Iranian mentality and the Iranian history and the jeopardy that Iran is in because of the Israeli possession of nuclear weapons. So he's pretty much starting from scratch. He's not a serious thinker. He is just a clerk, a good clerk, a good negotiator, but a clerk carrying out whatever President Trump wants at the moment. And Trump, of course, keeps changing his mind.
Thank you so much, Judge Napolitano. That brings us to an end for this program. It was a real pleasure talking to you and to get acquainted with you as well. Thank you so much for joining us in this edition of Unscripted.
It's my pleasure, Kabe. I hope sometime we can do this in person.
Indeed. I look forward to that day. Thank you so much. And that does it for this edition of the program. Judge Napolitano's comments in part are derived from the interviews that he's had with many political analysts and also officials. So his introspective on various issues like the Israeli genocide in Gaza or the Iran-U.S. indirect talks gives us an insight of the complexities and challenges involved. Until another edition of Unscripted, I'm Kabe. It's goodbye.
Rien n'est plus républicain.